In May 2025, a report from Caixin exposed something the world wasn't supposed to see. 18 provinces in China are behind on paying public servants. Not factory workers, not freelancers, cops, doctors, teachers. In Hunan, a police officer made just 3,700 yuan a month. No fuel stipend, no night shift bonus. He now patrols in his own car, at his own cost. In Guangdong, a public hospital closed its doors. Doctors hadn't been paid in 10 months. Some borrowed money just to eat. None of this appeared on the news, but the flags kept waving. The slogans kept repeating. Strong country, prosperous future. Yet the people who carry out the orders can't even afford breakfast. This isn't a delay. It's a rupture. A country that spends billions on global image, but can't pay the people who hold the line inside. What happens when the hands that enforce the rules start trembling from hunger? And when the badge becomes just another burden to carry? You don't need a protest to see collapse. You just need to look at who still shows up and what they've lost along the way. This isn't just a financial crisis. It's the slow death of a promise. According to China's Ministry of Finance, in January 2025, local government debt reached 47.5 trillion yuan. That number doesn't just mean red ink. It means hospitals closing, teachers quitting, cops going unpaid. For years, China's public sector ran on a hidden engine: land sales. Local governments sold off plots to developers. The cash funded roads, schools, salaries. It worked until the real estate market collapsed. Developers vanished, buyers disappeared, and suddenly that invisible engine stalled. In cities like Hunan and Guangxi, school principals received quiet instructions: cut bonuses, cancel overtime, delay checks, no press release, no apology. Only a new phrase entered the bureaucracy: understand the fiscal pressure. But the pressure wasn't just on the books. It was on the people holding the line. In Dongguan, health workers were told to stop logging overtime. There was no money to pay it, but the patients still came. So the nurses stayed, unpaid, underslept, quiet. In Fuyang, civil servants were issued base pay only, no allowances, no bonuses. A young officer wrote anonymously, "We don't ask questions anymore. We just show up." That's what collapse looks like in China. Not in riots, in routines stripped of meaning. Because the Chinese system was never built to adapt. It was built to obey. The state creates the plan. The local governments implement it. No questions, no changes. So when land sales collapsed, local leaders didn't redesign the budget. They didn't admit failure. They cut quietly, hoping no one would notice. And the first things they cut? The people least likely to resist. Teachers, doctors, police, those who were trained to follow orders. Those who were told they were the iron rice bowl. Now that rice bowl is empty, and no one dares break it, because asking why means challenging the system. And in China, there's no protocol for that. What makes this more dangerous is what it reveals. Beijing still funds grand infrastructure, still hosts global forums, still lends billions abroad, but it doesn't send fuel money to cops in Hunan. That's not mismanagement. That's intentional neglect. Because the core design was never to sustain. It was to appear unshakable. Now the cracks are showing. And instead of fixing the structure, Beijing tightens the mask. Slogans get louder, but behind them the salaries go missing. This isn't about politics anymore. It's about people who can't eat. And they are the ones carrying the load. The nurse working a night shift she isn't paid for. The teacher reusing old chalk because the supply room is locked. The cop patrolling in silence because the radio budget was frozen. Their voices won't go viral. Their stories won't make the news. But they're happening. Every day. In every province. And when the state demands loyalty, but offers no bread in return, what kind of loyalty remains? They believed in the system, not because they were naive, but because they were trained to. China's public workers, Teachers, police, nurses were the face of state power. They memorized slogans, passed loyalty tests, reported what needed to be reported. And in return, they got one thing: stability. Not wealth, not luxury, just the quiet promise of a paycheck. But in 2024 and 2025, that promise began to vanish. In Shaanxi, performance bonuses were suspended indefinitely. In Jiaodong, doctors were asked to repay past earnings marked irregular. In Kunming, junior officials stopped receiving full wages. No one told them when it would resume. There were no strikes, no press conferences, just a quiet shift from guaranteed to maybe. And no one asked questions, because in China, asking is dangerous. Instead, they adapted. A police officer in a southern city took a second job, driving for a food delivery app after night patrol. A teacher started tutoring online at midnight, whispering lessons in the dark. Not for ambition, just to cover rent. This isn't just economic. It's existential. These were the enforcers of silence, the people who made the machine work. Now, they are the first ones it is discarding. The illusion was always this, that the Chinese system was too organized to fall apart, that obedience guaranteed survival. But it doesn't. In reality, obedience made them vulnerable. They didn't push back when budgets were slashed. They didn't protest when wages were temporarily held. They waited, they endured, and they were punished for it. Meanwhile, corruption thrived at the top. Bonuses flowed upward. Cities launched new vanity projects. But the street-level guardians of the state were told to understand the situation. There's no misunderstanding anymore. The structure isn't stressed. It's unraveling. The deeper betrayal is this: the people who held the state together are now holding it up alone, and still they are told to stay silent. No complaints, no letters, no noise. But what happens when the most obedient stop believing? The regime doesn't fear rebellion. It fears abandonment, not a riot in the streets, but 1,000 quiet withdrawals. No one resigns, no one protests. They just do less. Less enforcement, less paperwork, less belief. The machine still runs, but it runs hollow, and no one knows how long that echo can last. This didn't happen by accident. China's collapse at the bottom is not the cost of crisis. It's the result of design. The system didn't break. It worked exactly as it was built. The Communist Party never promised prosperity for all. It promised discipline, loyalty, order. In return, it offered the illusion of security. Jobs in the public sector weren't rewards. They were leashes. Your income came from the state. Your pension came from the state. Your voice was owned by the state. That was the contract. And for years it held. But only because global demand kept money flowing in. The money funded infrastructure. The money paid salaries. The money kept the machine running. Then the world changed. Tariffs cut off the fuel. Foreign investors pulled back. Exports slowed. And Beijing didn't adapt. Tightened. Instead of stimulating consumption, it doubled down on control. Instead of empowering local governments, it starved them. Instead of opening markets, it silenced dissent. Because control is all it knows. The model is simple. You don't need participation when you have obedience. You don't need support when you have fear. But obedience costs money. And when that money dries up, the entire structure strains. Local governments now operate like unpaid interns, told to perform but not to expect anything. They still run schools, still staff hospitals, still patrol the streets. But with what? Budgets have been gutted. Land revenue is gone. And Beijing isn't sending relief. Why? Because it can't. The structure is too centralized to respond quickly, too opaque to acknowledge failure, too proud to admit the people at the bottom matter. This isn't just economic failure. It's a philosophical one. The state believed it could suppress demand, suppress dialogue, suppress risk, and still grow. It believed loyalty could be permanent, that silence could be systematized, that control was cheaper than care. But now, the cracks are not theoretical. They are human. A traffic cop using his own phone data because the department line was cut. A hospital administrator telling patients to bring their own gauze. A teacher asking parents to fund their own child's exam paper. These are not protests. They are symptoms. The system isn't fighting collapse. It's rationing it, letting some regions fall, letting some voices fade, so the image can be preserved. But that image no longer holds. The international press doesn't see it. Foreign investors don't feel it. But inside China, the people who never asked questions are now asking one: if we followed every rule, why were we the first to be abandoned? That's not resistance. It's recognition. The Chinese system wasn't built for endurance. It was built to impress, to intimidate, to control. But when the applause fades and the screen goes black, what's left? One teacher disappears from the morning roster. No announcement. She's been living on one paycheck for 3 months. One police officer stops checking alleyways at night. Not because he's lazy, because the fuel card no longer works, and his own money ran out 2 weeks ago. One nurse walks away from a double shift, not because the patients left, but because her knees gave out and her department can't afford replacements. This is how it spreads. Not like fire, like mold. Slow, quiet, rotting through the walls before anyone smells it. In Kunshan, once a proud factory hub, 1.2 million people vanished in 3 years. Not relocated, not transferred, just gone. They packed bags, left leases behind, and no one filled their place. The restaurants closed. The night markets died. The factories stood still. In Guangdong, hospitals started skipping night shifts. Too dangerous, they said. But the real reason, no more overtime budget. Patients still came. Some brought blankets. Some died waiting. In Zhejiang, police stations merged departments. But crime didn't merge. Break-ins went unsolved. Neighborhood patrols stopped knocking. Only the loudspeakers stayed on. Serve the people, they said. But no one could afford to. In Yunnan, a man posted photos of his wife's pay stub. She worked at a local clinic. Her monthly salary after deductions was 2,100 yuan, about $290. It was late. Again. He captioned the post with 4 words. We didn't expect this. They were not activists. They were not critics. They were just part of the machine. But the machine stopped feeding them. And so it goes. One clinic cuts heating in winter. One school tells parents to print their own textbooks. One district swaps full-time officers for volunteer patrol groups. Collapse here isn't one event. It's a sequence. The vendor loses foot traffic. The grocer reduces stock. The school cancels lunch programs. The teacher starts skipping class. The kids drop out. The mother quits work to stay home. The household income halves. The apartment is sold. The building is boarded up. One cycle. One family. 1,000 times over. In Guizhou, even the government admitted failure. They asked Beijing for help. The center said nothing, so officials stopped asking. Instead, they began borrowing from temples. Yes, temples. Public offices using religious donations to pay staff. One newspaper tried to cover the story. The article was taken down within hours. The new rule was simple. If you can't fix it, don't talk about it. But silence doesn't fill prescriptions, and slogans don't sweep the streets. So cracks became canyons. Hospitals with no nurses, classrooms with no chalk, courtrooms with no verdicts. People still showed up, but they brought their own paper, their own soap, their own expectations lowered to the floor. Even the police weren't spared. Some stopped wearing full uniforms. Some worked only daytime shifts. Some quit in silence, replaced by auxiliary volunteers with no training. This isn't a labor shortage. It's a loyalty shortage. And no campaign can fix that. The Chinese government doesn't fear revolution. It fears disconnection. That the people who once enforced the system will simply stop believing it deserves to function. Not because they hate it, because they've been left out of it. Foreign media won't see this. They'll look for tanks, protests, flags on fire. But that's not how this story ends. It ends with a registrar not filing birth certificates, a building inspector skipping safety checks, a town clerk erasing a line item and whispering, "Don't ask." It ends with a society that still functions on paper, but disappears in practice. And when the formality outlives the function, all that's left is the collapse that already happened, without anyone calling it by name. There was no explosion, no tanks in the street, no uprisings, no declarations, just fewer nurses, fewer patrols, fewer paychecks. The collapse didn't announce itself. It walked in dressed like normal. A teacher left the classroom. Cops skipped a shift. A mother stopped believing her son would get his pension. No one called it crisis, because crisis would require someone to take responsibility. But what if responsibility was never part of the system? What if the silence was by design, not to protect the people, but to protect the illusion that order still exists, that salaries still arrive, that the system still functions. But inside it's emptying out, not fast, not loud, just enough each day to make people stop asking. And so we ask instead, if the people who enforce the law can't survive, what law is really being enforced? If the people who believed in the system are walking away, what's left for those who never did? And if no one sounds the alarm, does that mean there's no emergency, or that there's no one left to hear it?